I know you don't like him, but I'll probably vote Tory. I mean, May looks like a leader, and Corbyn, when he's a tramp, isn't he?
Superficial ad hominem. How you personally think he looks is not connected to his leadership qualities. This argument is similar to commenting on a female politician's looks in order to belittle her political ability.
What do I mean by leader? Well, she just sounds really professional in interviews, and I think you've got to sound like that if you're leading the country. Corbyn just gets ratty all the time, like when they ask him about the polls.
The Mail is owned by Viscount Rothermere, worth approximately £1 billion. The Sun and the Times are owned by companies controlled by Rupert Murdoch, who is worth around £10 billion. The Express is owned by Richard Desmond, worth around £1 billion. The BBC have been threatened numerous times with reduction or removal of their funding via the licence fee, not to mention the many prominent BBC staff who are ex-Conservative Party members and supporters, such as Nick Robinson and Andrew Neil. All of these powerful people have a vested interest in not allowing the leader who pledges increased taxation and regulation of the super-rich to get into power. Tactics utilized against Corbyn include baseless smears, speculative associations with many undesirable organizations, insinuations of connections with terrorist groups, perversion of political labels, fabricated narratives of entryism within the Labour Party, as well as endless repetitions of poll ratings and studious avoidance of policy discussion, unless it is to deride the funding of proposed policies.
Well, yeah, I've seen the manifesto. It was very good. There's no way he can pay for that.
Argument from incredulity. I cannot imagine how this can be true, therefore it must be false.
And you can't forget about some of the things the guy said. A shame that Bin Laden was killed. Nah, not having that.
False attribution and quote out of context. This was a sentence fragment, and the point that was being made can only be understood by hearing the remainder of the sentence, which confirmed that Corbyn would have preferred to have an official trial, rather than a summary execution. If the flawed logic is applied completely, then David Cameron said he thought it was a tragedy that Osama bin Laden was killed.
I'm not saying Theresa May's perfect, but at least she's got a proper plan for Brexit.
Falsehood. She has never presented a detailed strategy to Parliament, let alone members of the public. If she has a plan, nobody outside of her cabinet seems to know about it.
Well, I don't know about hard Brexit, but 52% of people voted out, so they're either going to go for May's plan, or let Corbyn reverse the referendum result. Can't see it.
False dichotomy. These are not the only two options available, and Corbyn has explicitly stated that Labour respect the result of the referendum and will carry it to its conclusion, on the condition that a favourable settlement is negotiated.
Well, whatever you say about Brexit or austerity, you're going to have to accept that the Tories always have to clear up Labour's mess. Always borrowing too much on the never-never.
Falsehood. 10 minutes on the Office for National Statistics website will reveal that the Conservatives are in fact the party who borrow the most and pay back less debt when in power. The prevailing counter-narrative about Labour's apparent fiscal irresponsibility is assumed erroneously, and propagated by news outlets whose owners have a vested interest in not being taxed or regulated more.
Austerity's crap and that, but what else are you going to do to pay back all the debt?
False dichotomy. Cutting public spending is a political choice made in order to cut the size of the state, a modern conservative desire. Most Keynesian economists agree that in times of economic recession or turmoil, the government should stimulate demand with additional infrastructure projects, which then leads to economic activity from the private sector, which grows the economy. Debt will soon shrink as a percentage of GDP, and become more manageable as a result. Not to mention the increased tax receipts generated to assist in paying the debt down, which has simply not materialized under the austerity program.
Look, I can't just keep maxing my credit card and expect the bank to keep lending to me indefinitely. We have to live in the real world and stop expecting the government to keep giving us free stuff all the time.
Thought-terminating cliché, a sovereign currency-issuing state cannot go bankrupt. It is flexible and can print as much money as it needs, or devalue its currency deliberately to increase export revenue. This does not mean inevitable Weimar-style hyperinflation for the masses. The government already prints billions of pounds of new money through quantitative easing programs. This misguided strategy has only tended to increase asset values at the top of the economic tree. Free stuff is paid for through taxation. No matter how poor or vulnerable someone may be, they have likely purchased something with VAT added, meaning they have contributed something towards that program. This is how tax is supposed to work. From each according to their means, to each, according to their needs.
I don't mind the worthy getting help, but I've had up to ear subsidising layabouts who watch bloody Jeremy Kyle all day and can afford a better Sky package than I can. So I'm all for these cuts.
Anecdotal evidence. Basing sweeping policy decisions on a person you suspect to be on the take is not rational. Whether you like said person or not, they may have an illness you cannot, or do not wish to, understand. Even if they don't, the fact that your anecdotal scrounger receives benefits under false pretenses is not necessarily symptomatic of a wider issue that urgently needs addressing. The most recent studies actually demonstrated that more genuine benefit entitlement goes unclaimed than taken fraudulently, so this scenario literally costs the country nothing. However, cuts to benefits levels will certainly affect genuine claimants' quality of life negatively. Perhaps the issue is really that some professionals sometimes erroneously judge a claimant's entitlement, and we should avoid throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
I know it gets bloody tough down at the bottom, but if you pick yourself up by your bootstraps and plough on, you can make something of yourself. I didn't have a pot to piss in, now I own my own business and employ a dozen people. And if I can do it...
Survivorship bias. Your story of triumph, like the anecdotal story about the scrounger, cannot be used to legitimize a system of oppression. The issue is not that lower socioeconomic groups cannot ever improve their circumstances, it is that the support networks needed for this to happen are being eroded rapidly. Those higher up the socioeconomic ladder will find far less obstacles to self-actualization, and this injustice is not just bad for the people held down, but for the wider economy and culture. When only a narrow group of people with similar life experience take up the vast majority of lucrative positions within that economy, it is to the detriment of all, in terms of perspectives and creativity, but also for the lack of social mobility role models for the future.
I don't want to see people on the street, but the fact is some of them deserve to be there from their own life choices. Free secondary education, free healthcare, and they still end up sleeping rough, probably on drugs. Should try living a few days in a Rio slum dodging bullets and the Zika virus, see how easy they have it here.
Fallacy of relative privation. Just because situations are materially worse in another part of the world does not delegitimize the experience of people suffering here. If this notion were applied to every social problem, the race to the bottom in living standards would be catastrophic. Also, a caricature of a situation in another part of the world, which the debater has no personal experience of, is the weakest form of anecdotal justification.
Oh, Corbyn's a hard left commie. We just don't like communism in Britain. Never have, never will. If I want to live in Soviet Russia or North Korea, I'll make the choice by moving there, thanks.
Ignorance of political systems. Corbyn has never identified as a communist, and has not proposed anything like collectivization or equalizing pay for all workers. This shows ignorance of the nuances in political systems between the old Cold War dichotomy of communism vs capitalism. Hard left in the typical spectrum would probably see Corbyn proposing to abolish the state and the corporation, and divide society into collectives of mutuals or workers' cooperatives. Alternatively, in the state communist sense, he would be proposing that the state runs everything. He has said none of these things, and seems by his policy announcements and previous statements to be a democratic socialist, which would not even raise an eyebrow in Northern European politics. And thin end of the wedge fallacy. To suggest renationalization of crucial state infrastructure and natural monopolies means gulags in Birmingham by the end of the Parliament is infantile reasoning.
You lefties really need to stop hating on business. Business is what pays for everything. And if they leave because taxes get too high, well, you'll all have to pay more.
Strongman reasoning. The left tends to be opposed to big business because of its lack of accountability to wider society, and its huge financial power to bend national governments to its will. The left opposes some methods big business uses to consolidate and expand its power, like excessive lobbying for sweetheart tax deals and deregulation of its more nefarious activities, not to mention its blackmail to vanish if it considers its social responsibilities to workers, customers, and taxpayers to be too onerous. These tactics and more give big business an unfair advantage over smaller competitors, which the left opposes, but it is politically expedient for the right to expand their opponents' opposition to include all business.
I don't really want to see us go back to the dark days of the 70s again, where trade union barons ground the country to a halt, and Corbyn's invited the IRA to hold parades in Trafalgar Square and abolish the army.
Appeal to fear. Baseless nonsense used to whip up emotional hysteria. This kind of tactic is used when it is supposed that the person listening will respond more to demagoguery than logic.
Anyway, if Corbyn wants everyone to be more equal, maybe he should start by working the minimum wage himself. And then I might believe some of his daydream policies.
Appeal to hypocrisy. The idea that anyone who advocates more equality is only credible if they just wear a sack and live in an industrial bin is beyond farce. Corbyn is already critiqued negatively on what he wears, so this superficial snobbery alone would not allow him near a political platform.
That I don't have time to stand here and argue all day. The people have spoken, and once we're properly out of the EU-SSR, things are going to start looking really positive here.
Argumentum ad populum. A proposition is claimed to be good solely because many people believe it will be. Politics is not a rugby match. Parties who enact bad policies affect you negatively, as well as your political opponents. If you cannot defend your political views from even mild criticism and logic, the likelihood is that you don't actually believe these things, but have been convinced of these things without realizing by a very effective media machine. Test your political views in proper debate by applying critical thinking to every statement you make. Arm yourself with wisdom in the voting booth, for all of our sakes.